Resuming debate, the honourable member for Churchill, Kiwatanik Aski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very proud to rise in this House to speak to our motion today, essentially calling on the new Liberal government to act immediately and fix employment insurance for Canadians. On this side of the House, we know that the NDP has always stood up for Canadian workers who depend on a strong social safety net, a safety net that they can rely on. That safety net has been under attack in the last few decades. The most vicious attacks were undertaken by past Liberal and Conservative governments, whose actions in the 90s have caused a great deal of harm to particularly the employment insurance system. In recent months, we have heard a great number of promises coming from the government benches on how they plan to fix the EI system, a system that many of their constituents rely on as well. But that kind of support is not, we have yet to see in action. And in fact, despite commitments that were made even in the election by the governing party, one that was definitely not made was one to stop pillaging billions of dollars from the EI account. Mr. Speaker, I believe that as a member of Parliament, you always have to know your history. So let's look at that history. Let's go back to the 1990s. The Liberal Prime Minister at the time, in the 1990s, adopted a series of measures that led to a drastic drop in EI eligibility. The fundamentals of these changes were brought into power as well by progressive Conservative government, then governed by Brian Mulroney. The Liberal Party, when it came back into power, did not miss the opportunity to continue the work of dismantling the employment insurance system. In 1994, then-Minister Axworthy proposed a reform of the employment insurance system and the adoption of a new bill in 1996 that radically changed how employment insurance, then called unemployment insurance, worked. It changed the system from an insurance mechanism to something that put more emphasis on individuals' responsibility to sort out their employment situation. The consequences of these measures were dire. The proportion of unemployed Canadians who received benefits was nearly cut in half between 1990 and 1997. Now, Mr. Speaker, many, not just progressive economists and progressive researchers, but others, including the Conference Board of Canada, have made a direct connection between the cuts to employment insurance and the rise of income inequality in our country. As the Liberals of the 1990s continue to push forward with their changes, we are still living with the consequences today. Employment insurance is one of the strongest links in our social safety net, and it should come as no surprise that its demise has led to skyrocketing inequalities. Let's look at one of the most dramatic decisions to date when it comes to EI. The $51 billion that were pillaged by the Liberal government that were in the EI fund. This, as many know, is not government money. It's the money of Canadian workers and Canadian employers that were put into this fund. This was taken from the premiums employers and workers paid into the system, and it should have remained to help workers on an ongoing basis. Previous Conservative governments went full speed ahead with dangerous reforms that put a huge strain on Canadian workers. If half of Canadian unemployed workers had access to EI in the midst of the Liberal reforms in the 90s, the Conservatives doubled down on challenges to create even more barriers in accessing employment insurance. Many of these changes were mean-spirited, forcing workers to take a job that would be up to 1 hour away from where they lived, and taking lower-paid jobs at that. We often heard that the Conservatives wanted to match every job opening with Canadians that were able to do the work. But particularly in terms of seasonal workers, what they created were conditions where seasonal workers, many, had to give up their trade and leave their home communities. Today, less than 4 Canadian workers out of 10 facing unemployment have access to EI. In terms of accessibility rates, the unprecedented historic low of 36.5% eligibility was reached while at the Conservatives' helm. How did we get here? by repeatedly putting up barriers to accessing employment insurance. The increase in work hours that is now between 420 to 700 hours, depending on where one lives, is a considerable barrier to accessing the system. A Canadian living in Western Canada might have to work much longer than a Canadian in the East in order to access employment insurance. Having inconsistent access rates between one region has the unintended consequence of not being able to take into account a rapidly changing economic situation in certain parts of the country. This, Mr. Speaker, has to be changed. That is why the NDP stands by its proposal and stands along with many other advocates in supporting the proposal of moving to a universal 360-hour threshold for workers, regardless of where they live. The Alberta government has requested an alleviation and demands that the government take into account the rapidly degrading economic situation in their part of the country. Premier Notley said Albertans should be able to enjoy the same access to benefits, and we hope that the federal government will act on their needs. This dramatic shift in the economic situation for the people of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and in other parts of the country is one of the reasons why we feel that it is a priority to present this motion in the House here today. The creation of a universal qualifying threshold, regardless of the regional rate of unemployment, should be a priority for this government. The regional threshold never made any sense, but it has been shown in recent months as an ill-advised approach to administering a critical program. The bottom line is that employment insurance should be there for every worker that needs it, regardless of where they live, and the system has to take into account the economic condition of various areas in the country so that things can shift quickly. A lower threshold would also allow for more Canadians to have access to the regime, and we hope that the government will take this into account immediately. We are also proud to introduce a proposal that would repeal other aspects of the harmful Conservative reforms, including the need for Canadians to uproot themselves to find employment. A one-hour commute should not be imposed on Canadians as an eligibility criteria to receive the benefits for which they have paid. We are also proud to present measures to protect the EI account from political interference and to ensure that what workers and employers pay into the system will only be used for their benefit and will not be used to fund tax reductions for the richest Canadians or for the biggest corporations. Considering the timing of this motion, Mr. Speaker, we hope that our colleagues in all parties will find that the federal government must take immediate action. Monsieur le Président, la motion présentée par ma collègue de Jonquière arrive à point. Nous devons réitérer la nécessité d'abolir les réformes de l'assurance-emploi adoptées par le gouvernement précédent, une abolition qui trouve un large consensus tant au Québec que dans les Maritimes. Quiconque ayant eu à passer par le processus d'assurance-emploi saura que le nombre d'embauches à l'accès du programme est devenu insurmontable pour un trop grand nombre de travailleurs et de travailleuses. C'est vrai à un point tel que plus de 6 Canadiens sur 10 perdant leur emploi se voient privés de leurs prestations. Cela veut dire qu'une grande majorité des Canadiens qui perdent leur emploi peuvent se retrouver sans aucun revenu dès que leur situation professionnelle se dégrade. Et comme j'ai dit, Monsieur le Président, c'est le fruit d'une succession de réformes ayant démantelé cette portion importante de notre régime de sécurité sociale, menée à la fois par les conservateurs et les libéraux. Ce chantier doit être entrepris avec sérieux et nous espérons que nous arriverons avec la société civile et avec le groupe de chômeurs à maintenir la pression sur le gouvernement afin qu'il entreprenne de bâtir un filet de protection sociale qui réponde aux besoins des travailleurs et des travailleuses. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this motion in front of us today is fundamentally about justice, a principle that ought to guide all of us as Canadian parliamentarians. The need to achieve justice for Canadian workers, the need to achieve justice for Canadian families. Mr. Speaker, let's fix employment insurance. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Bravo. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the comments from my colleague. And I was very proud with the platform put forward by our government, certainly through the election. And it's interesting to note, at the early outset of committees, my colleague across had even received support for a study that was going to be held on EI and EI reform. So I'm just asking her, how this sort of squares the circle with wanting to go forward with an EI study, but presenting these changes that she presents in the motion today.
The honourable member for Churchill-Kiwantanuk Askey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I am very proud that our motion at HUMA Committee is going forward. Very succinct, focused study on based on hearing from Canadians what exactly they're facing right now. And obviously, to add to the urgency of the need for action, and that's what we're presenting in the House of Commons today. As the member across pointed out, many commitments were made in the election by the government, and it's time to act. I mean, in Alberta, the rate of employment insurance applications has doubled. We know that only 39% of eligible workers are receiving EI. I mean, it truly is reaching a crisis point. So, what we're saying is that we need to act. We need to obviously hear from workers, from advocates, from industry, from stakeholders, and let's not delay action. So we hope that the new Liberal government will act to fix EI immediately.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Barrie, Innisfil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for her speech on the motion today. At the beginning of her speech, she mentioned the fact that her party has consistently stood up for Canadian workers. One of the things that I believe Canadians want is to work, Mr. Speaker. And what this motion proposes is 2 months of work for effectively 1 year of EI. So rather than focus, and it's important to have that social safety net because it is a temporary measure and it's proposed as that in a difficult situation, I'd be more curious in hearing the member's position on supporting job and job growth for Canadian workers, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Churchill-Kiwantanuk Askey.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, if the member was listening to my speech, I mean, the need to support employment insurance, a system that is paid for by Canadian workers and Canadian employers is critical in closing the gap in terms of inequality in our country. Coming from Western Canada, I'm aware of many people that are right now hurting a great deal, losing their jobs. Coming from Manitoba, people are moving back because they've lost their jobs on the oil patch. And they need something to pull them through until they find that next job. So I think we need to take seriously what people are going through, the fact that they paid into EI, that they have the right to access EI, and of course, as was pointed out, most people in Western Canada aren't eligible given the unfair barriers that they face. And so today, we're here to talk about the need to fix a system that workers have paid into, that belongs to Canadian workers, and I hope that all Canadian parliamentarians will support this. Thank you.
C'est un commentaire. L'honorable député de Trois-Rivières.
Merci, M. le Président. Je remercie ma collègue pour son discours. Le régime de l'assurance-emploi célèbre ses 75 ans cette année. Et ce qu'on a pu voir avec les réformes au fil des années, c'est autant de réformes qui ont eu toujours les mêmes conséquences, rendre l'admissibilité au régime de plus en plus difficile et les prestations de plus en plus réduites. Alors, le 360 heures, c'est une première étape, mais j'aimerais aussi l'entendre sur des réformes importantes qu'on aimerait voir suite à la réforme conservatrice. J'entends par exemple la notion de l'emploi convenable ou bien les 3 catégories d'emplois qui sont, à mon avis, autant de peste au régime.
La députée de Churchill, Kiwatanakaski.
Merci à mon collègue. J'aimerais reconnaître le travail formidable qu'il a fait aussi au sujet de l'assurance-emploi. Évidemment, il y a une liste de réformes qui doivent être faites pour défaire les mesures imposées par les conservateurs. Et on espère, comme le dit la motion, on espère qu'on pourrait agir, forcer le gouvernement d'agir aussitôt que possible. Et au point final, soit que c'est la réalité des travailleurs saisonniers chez moi ou à l'est du Canada, soit c'est ce que vivent les gens à l'ouest. Le point final, c'est que les travailleurs canadiens, les travailleuses canadiennes sont en train de vivre une crise. Alors, il faut qu'on agisse immédiatement et c'est pour ça que je suis fière que nous, comme néo-démocrates, on a mis cet agenda de l'avant. On espère que tous l'appuieront.